welcome. For those of you who are here already to our Unifying the Tribes of IT and Marketing webinar, we're happy to have you. My name is Sammy Anderson. I'm our marketing coordinator here at Softcrylic. If you have any questions throughout the webinar or want follow-up questions answered, always reach out to us, info@softcrylic.com. Today we have Jerry Halou, our Senior Director of Data Activation, joined by his guest, Nikhil Paul, who's a culture and team coach who founded We Are Human. They're going to be talking about the three-step process to try and broker the peace between IT and marketing teams, how to make them cohesively work together. So with that, I'll pass things off to Jerry and Nikhil. You guys can get started.
Thank you. Thank you, Sammy. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. I think today's session is really special. The few we've been talking a lot about specifically technology, but this time around, we wanted to do something different. I will let Nikhil introduce himself in a minute, but me and Nikhil know each other for some time. We actually, at some point, I was TA, but I still gave him an A. He was an excellent student. But recently we reconnected. I got to know a little bit more about the work that he does, and mostly around culture and bringing people together to get those potential out of teamwork. And as we were talking, I expressed to him that one of the main challenges that I face today in my job as a consultant is getting different teams in the company to really work together. I have many slides that I sit down and tell them about Center of Excellence and about steering committee and strategy. And it's really hard to get through for people to get over some of the politics within a company and really work together. So as we talked through it, Nikhil had amazing ideas, which I was like, wow, I want to bring those into some of my current engagements, but better off, let's just share this with the world, let everyone see how this is possible. And I think this is gonna be really exciting. I got a sneak peek into some of the content he has. I think it's going to be enjoyable, and we're going to take any questions you have and also discuss them in some detail where we can reflect to exactly how to get these implemented in our day-to-day job. Nikhil, I'm going to pass this to you, and it's your show, man. We're here.
All right. Well, thanks, Jerry. Hi, everybody. Welcome. And thank you again to Jerry and Softcrylic and Sammy for all of you for having me. Yeah, let me give you, like Jerry was saying, let me give you a quick bio about myself so you understand where I'm coming from. I'm a culture and team coach. I'm the founder of We Are Human. And in my previous life, I was a startup founder. So after graduating from electrical engineering, I decided to go a different route. I decided to go into software and web development. And in fact, my first startup, we primarily focused on employee engagement software. So I spent a good amount of years just working with CEOs and HR leaders and understanding what were some of their biggest problems and what were some of their biggest issues and trying to build software around that. So we built like software that picked up on how people were feeling, and then it gave recommendations on what to do in concerning culture and engagement. So that's been my background. I career pivoted to this because I felt like I really wanted to try something different, and I feel like I have a little bit more of a public speaking skill set. So that's what I've been doing with We Are Human for the past few years, where I basically work with teams and companies, and I focus on how do I get them inspired, how do I train them to be happier and high performing. And I specifically focus on companies that are going through or teams that are going through three specific places, which is one is some level of change. So that's a consistent theme in all the work I'm working with is like, how do you get a new leader to connect to their team? How do you get a new team to connect with each other? Or in this case, like how do you even like implement new change within a company? So that's where I see some of these issues I'm going to be talking about. And of course, around that leads into the next topic, which is conflict resolution or teams that have kind of hit a plateau. So within that realm, I've seen a lot of different things. And these are some of my insights based on kind of the literature of organizational psychology and on change management. And it's kind of bringing those two subjects together. So yeah, without further ado, I can just share my presentation and just kind of jump into it. And after each section, what we'll do is Jerry and I, we can talk about it further, right? So, all right, so let's jump into it. Jerry, can you see my screen? Looks good. Okay, awesome. So like I said, welcome again to the Unifying the Tribes of IT and Marketing, and let's jump right into it. So let's set the stage, right? our default social formation as human beings is that we're tribal. I have to say that from the beginning, right? Like, in fact, you could say that the most progress we've ever made as human beings is when we are in a competitive mode as rival groups competing. And it just kind of in some ways brings out the best in us. In other ways, it kind of doesn't, right? And how that applies to companies is that in the beginning, startups and organizations are pretty good about being tribal inwardly, meaning like, hey, let's fight the outside external forces and come together as a group. But as organizations grow, it's harder to maintain that sense of in-tribe feeling, right? Especially now if you don't interact with different people in different groups as much. And the way to think about this is that as corporations grow, and you all know this, you've lived through this, there then becomes explicit kind of these functional and procedural borders and walls that are put up. And so all of a sudden, it's almost like there's a structural expectation to say that you have to be a bit removed or a bit impersonal from people in the other team. So I guess all of that to say there's systemic things at play that make departments or groups kind of compete and have conflict with each other. And so that's kind of when tribalism gets baked in, when you have these structures that builds these departments to kind of work against each other. And what happens is that a lot of times you don't see it until you implement a change program or change initiative, right? That's when it finally rears its ugly, dysfunctional head, right? And so McKinsey has a famous statistic around this, which is that 70% of large-scale change programs fail. Like they don't reach their stated goals. And one of the biggest reasons is that departments and leaders in the organizations come with this kind of scarcity mindset, right? Where they have not only competing priorities, but they have very poor or non-existent collaboration between them. And that has a downward trickle effect. So for employees who are on the front lines, they're the ones who kind of ultimately experience this. They experience this as negative or kind of unequal interactions between these two departments, right? So for example, the marketing team, they'll view the IT department employees as the people who only know how to say no to opportunities. Like I feel like that's just a common, almost trope, but it's true. It's based in reality of what people perceive each other. The flip side is IT views marketing folks as these distracted time and money wasters. Like there's these frivolous rapscallions who come in with all these ideas and just like blow up the budget and the scope, right? And so these are kind of stereotypes that are built, but it's grounded in some level of reality, but it just keeps getting kind of amplified, especially when you're trying to get them to work together on a large scale change initiative. So the question is, how do we turn this around? How do we help departments kind of overcome their animosity and their conflict and get them to come to work together to help implement a solution or a change you're trying to do? So I have what I like to call a 3-part people strategy. I think if you're trying to do any change effort, it has to focus on the people within it. And I think you should apply these 3 principles. So let's jump into it. The first step is you want to start each project by first organizing what I like to call a peace summit, okay? Before you can get 2 different departments to work together, you need to first broker a truce between these historical rival departments. And you got to get them to meet each other on neutral and almost equal ground, right? And in these meetings, in this first kickoff meeting, you want to bring everyone who's connected together, who's important, who has some level of stakeholder responsibility, right? And the first step is you want to ask them to properly introduce each other. If you're coming in as the outsider in this change initiative, or if you're a leader, use this as kind of the impetus to be like, hey, I just want to get a sense of the lay of the land. Can you all properly introduce yourselves? Tell me your team, tell me your department, tell me what are your roles and responsibilities, and kind of use the pretext of you being an outsider to get them to talk about themselves. That's what I want to do in the first step, right? Like you want to get these departments and their department heads to talk about some of their biggest projects, the solutions they've overseen recently. And it's a really good way to get them to start talking. Now they're talking about themselves, right? And the key is, in this first meeting, is to get them to talk about themselves at length, about what they care about, what are their priorities. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to make them feel seen and heard. It's such a basic human psychological insight, but it's very critical. And if you use that whole pretext of, oh, I'm new here, I just want to understand, get them to start talking about themselves. And once they do, you'll start understanding more where they're coming from. What are their priorities? What's their scope on all this whole project and what they're looking at? And what you're ultimately trying to impart on them in this first kickoff meeting is that, hey, I care. I really care about the work you all do, and that's why I'm here and I'm listening to where you're coming from. The next part to this is make sure in the same kickoff meeting, I always say you got to genuinely praise them, right? You want to recognize them for the work they've done so far, because most often when you're coming in, you're probably shifting their work a little bit to the sidelines. So they might feel a little bit unrecognized and unappreciated. So you want to verbalize that. You want to say, hey, I want to thank John from IT for helping me figure out all the technical considerations in our first call. It was super helpful. In fact, I've seen all the work you've done so far on the digital transformations in the previous years. And I just have to say, I'm super impressed. So again, externalize appreciation. Make sure they see it in front of the other department. Hey, this person just appreciated me as an outsider. You're kind of, again, bringing them to the fold. And the point I want to say about this entire process is it's not rocket science, right? This is like kindergarten stuff, but most people don't do this. The practice of bringing people together and starting off a project meeting on equal grounds and making people feel seen and heard is so critically important, because you're starting that project on a positive note. And more importantly, you're slowly disarming them. And you'll need that for what comes next. Because once you've made them feel seen and heard, the next step is what I like to say, present to them the Night King. For those of you who are not Game of Thrones fans, basically he is literally the biggest enemy in that fantasy show. And he basically forces all these warring kingdoms to come together and unite so they can defeat him. And that's the basic principle I want to put here as well. You all as consultants or leaders, you need to introduce what I like to call an existential crisis, right? For why you're bringing this initiative, why you're brought in, why this change is happening. Organizational psychology calls this superordinate problem, right? Like it's a goal that, or a problem so big and threatening that it not only affects both their departments, but it also affects the company in some sort of seismic way. So for example, you can say, if we don't implement this new analytics tool, we're not going to know where our long-term clients are dropping off at, and we might just lose 10% of our revenue, just like that. So now you've connected this larger problem that the company has to deal with, and now they've taken their interest, right? So if you've been paying attention to them in the first part where they talked about their department's focus and their priorities, this next step is now you got to connect this larger problem to their individual kind of parochial issues and their threats. Like, what are they thinking about? So for example, you can say, you know, you all in marketing have talked about how you want to make more focused campaigns for different tiers of prospects. Well, guess what? Using this analytics tool, you can get that data right away. So now you're connecting the larger problem to their interests and their goals, right? In departmental goals. And here's the thing I want you to remember the most. In this process, when you're getting them and you're talking about this problem, it's not just you presenting. You want to get them to publicly admit this is a top priority. That's the goal here. You want them to come in at the end and say, yeah, you know what? This is kind of a big deal for us. You're absolutely right. We should be taking this seriously. And if you do that, what you're again using is human psychology to your favor, right? Because once leaders and departments publicly recognize issues and commit to start solving that problem together, they've now given their word in front of everyone else. And you're not going to believe that's a powerful driver of human behavior, because nobody wants to let anybody else down, especially if you said it publicly, right? Especially in a meeting of equal minds. So the last part, once you've made them feel seen and heard and had them publicly recognize, okay, this is a big problem, the next step is to commit to putting resources and people towards that problem. And for me, the best way to do this is to create a team, set up a team, right? A team is one of the few ways you can actually create momentum around your project. And they're going to be the people who direct the right resources to the right areas, right? Like a team is just better at communicating more efficiently between departments. They're better at problem solving. They're also the best at holding people accountable. And so there's a lot of value in assigning a team to help you move this project along. So the way to go about doing this is select a few top people respected by everyone in each of the departments, right? And like you can either invite them or nominate them to be part of this team. And of course, if you can get the leaders of the department themselves, that'd be great, but sometimes that's hit or miss. You're never gonna always get them. But either way, try to find people who have some level of influence, right? People who can bend the ears of decision makers, and make sure that the team that you put together reflects all the right people that need to be in this room. Either they're subject matter experts or they represent stakeholder interests. So either way, it should be crucial that whoever you put in this team, these people help move the ball along. That's the focus here, help move the ball along, right? And once you get a group of people to come together and they agree to be a part of this, usually they're volunteering to do this on top of whatever else they're doing in their work life, right? So it's one more thing you're adding to their plate. You got to ask them very clearly to commit. Again, because that whole public committing is super important for them to see, okay, yeah, I want to help see this project through. And what you're essentially saying is, look, I'm not going to go to the IT department and chase my tail around there or go to the marketing department. I'm going to say you as a team is responsible for moving the ball along. It's your responsibility as opposed to those departments. Because I don't know who in the department I can go to, but you as a team have to take collective responsibility. And for me, that's very important because in both ways, one, it holds them accountable. And the other way is you're now empowering them. You're empowering a group of people to say, it's your responsibility and it's your task. And so now they're going to act like it. So for me, this last part is very important, that they feel a sense of empowerment as they jump forward in this project. Okay. So in summary for the first point, make them feel valued, have them publicly admitted as the top priority, and empower a small, diverse team to see it through.
This is amazing. Okay. Let's try to take this and apply it to reality. So as you talk through this about organizing, bringing people, introducing people, there is someone who is driving this. It could be one or multiple people. In your opinion, how important, what would be the things that person need to have so that they're able to do these? Like the idea of bringing people into the same room initially, it's already difficult, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially now we don't have same room. It's more like same Zoom call. And to have people introduce each other and such. So does that require someone to be any special, like, do they need to do things special or are they just like, hey, I have an idea. I'm a junior, analyst and I really want to do this. Like, how do I get this ball rolling?
Yeah. So the best thing is there's two principles at work, right? People don't change unless the power dynamic changes. So if there's a hierarchy, this has to be a top-down hierarchy. So if the boss or whoever's bringing you in, so I'm assuming in this case it's a consultant, they're not going to bring you in unless they have some level of budget or urgency behind them. And so you want to tap into that, right? Whenever you're coming in, you want to have decision makers at the top who it's aligning with. Because if it's not aligning with top decision makers, it's going to be very hard to get the other leaders or the departments to jump in. So you want to connect it to leadership's top priority. And when I say leadership, I mean like the executive team's top priority or the goals. And secondly, you want to then communicate the urgency of it. So if the leader at the top or whoever brought you in, most likely it'll be somebody in the top, really connects with the urgency, then you want to tap into that and build momentum on that. Okay, so hey, listen, in the first step, I think before we start this project, I think it'd be very important if we can get the IT head and the marketing head to jump together and kind of powwow and talk about our first steps, because that's really going to help the ball moving along. So I think the urgency of like, okay, we started a project, let's do this project right, plus the right person at the top to push it, gets the people in the room. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to get somebody to jump into your Zoom call.
Yeah, and I think actually, so I'm trying to think about it as like an application, right? Like, and many times the VPs and directors, whether they're on IT or marketing, they have their own budgets, they have their own plans. This idea might be coming from one side, not both. And sometimes it could be coming in from someone who is nowhere on the top, right? Yeah. So what I would recommend, like for folks who are in companies where, they're not yet at a place where they're bringing the money where they can make these decisions, but if they can make a case, and this can be the case made either, building the case to be like, hey, there is value, like the same way you said, the analytics might be able to help us in identifying the 10% of revenue lost. If there's that case being made where your department gets buy-in, and then from there, if the executives in that department see like, okay, I can get behind this, And I need IT, or and I'm sorry, we're always referring to marketing and IT, but that's not always the case. It can be any two divisions, right? But let's say we need the other team to be also part of it, because we cannot do this on our own. So that could be then the way for the big guys that have more decision power to make this happen. So it's not, I wouldn't say that this should be only like, don't limit yourself to say, I don't have yet the authority to bring them together. Yes, maybe you don't, but if you make a good case and you sell it to your own team, then this can be the way to bring everyone together.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, you can upsell somebody on the urgency and the value of what you're trying to suggest. Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point.
No, this is great. I think this is a very important first step, which I agree. The fact of having people initially in a very informal way to speak about what they've done, who they are, breaks the ice, and also breaks the stereotypes. I mean, you nailed it when you said marketers say that IT people are the no people. I hear it all the time from marketers, because they say IT is going to take 6 months to implement this, or it's not on their top priority. And then IT also has their own perception and their own point of view, where marketers want everything last minute, and they just, they have the money, but they don't understand the complexity of it. I get it. And there's no right or wrong here, but there's also, this creates this barrier between these two departments, to the point where a lot of the enterprise software that is being designed today is in a way to enable marketers with no dependency on IT. Like, look how far we got. And we shouldn't be that way. I mean, end of the day, it's not about IT is doing their own thing, marketers doing their own thing. It's the same company. Like, they need to be like working together. So that barrier needs to be broken in some cases to make big impact. And I think this Peace Summit is a great first step.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to kind of just bring them together and say, hey, I acknowledge that you're important in this process that I'm doing. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So, all right. So the next step, so we'll jump into the next one. Once you've organized the Peace Summit, the next step I like to call is giving them a challenge, right? So once you've got a group of people recognizing that this is a problem, and again, you can upsell them this problem, like Jerry, you were mentioning, and they consider it a top priority, and they're willing to commit people and resources towards it in the form of a team, the next step is to get them to agree on what success looks like, right? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges of any initiative or cross-functional project, is that people don't have a clear sense of what internal winning at a company looks like, right? So for example, if it's a new CTO who comes in and he's like, all right, we're going to implement this new feedback system for the company to help better report bugs. And everyone's like, okay, yeah, let's do this. And that after all of that effort, like 18 months later, and tons of team effort and departments working together, and it's finally put in place, and you're like, so is it helping? And people are like, I guess, right? Like, I think it's better. How many times have we experienced that in companies? Like, a new initiative gets rolled and you're like, I think it's better. And like, I think that's such a wrong way to do it, because you've just wasted so much manpower and goodwill. It should be the opposite. People should be like, yeah, this definitely works, or no, it does not work. And I think that binary outcome is very important, because confusion and lack of clarity on what success looks like is the easiest path to mediocrity, or at worst, failure, right? So that's the first order of business for a team. What does success look like? And a good way to do that is to create a benchmark for internal success, right? Every team should try to come up with like 2 to 3 key performance indicators or milestones, right? And the thing about these metrics is that it should be black and white. There should not be any gray area to hide behind the metrics you choose, because it should be clear as day that either you've achieved them or you've not achieved them. So if you're talking about engagement and you're trying to institute a new analytic system to help increase engagement from 10% to 20%, then that's now the target, right? Now everyone's agreeing that's how we measure success by. So I think it's very important that people are very clear about what success looks like. And finally, once they agree on what that looks like, get the team to create what in organizational psychology is called performance challenge. And what I mean by a performance challenge is that it's a short-term ambitious goal that's doable, it's clear, and it's specifically built around your KPIs and milestones. So basically, by doing this, you can showcase the most meaningful short-range progress towards your larger goal. So for example, if you're trying to implement a new analytic system, maybe the first step is to see if the APIs are seamlessly making calls back and forth to each other. I'm making it up as I go, but like, it's like, okay, we need 99% reliability in calls. Okay, that's cool. That's a small step, right? And that step requires everyone on the team to work together, the IT people, the marketing people. And again, now you're using human psychology to your advantage, because this is what people call team efficacy. It's the moment when a group of people come together, and you see it in movies all the time, right? Like in the beginning, they're like team movies, people are like, oh yeah, I guess we have to work together. I don't like it. But then once they have to solve their first challenge together, they become a team. That's when they crystallize and they become like this living, breathing, high performance team. So it's very important to set a short-term performance challenge that really gets everyone excited and they can work towards. Okay, so once you've put together a game plan with the departments and this team, somewhere along the process, this happens. And it's painful, but absolutely necessary, right? Like the cultural band-aid gets ripped off and the group touches on what is the point of this whole presentation, which is interdepartmental conflict. Here's the thing about conflict. You can't avoid it. You need to have tough conversations because they bring out and reveal kind of any simmering tensions or grievances between these departments. And this is a result of past failures, right? And that's the thing I want you to think about when you come into this thing. You are coming into an existing environment where they've already been tension long before you got there, and there will be tension long after you're gone. You just have to be mindful about that. You just have to know that when you come in there, and you got to get them to kind of start airing their dirty laundry, so to speak, in front of each other. Because by doing that, you're creating a cultural precedent that, look, we need to be transparent, and these tough conversations are the only way this team is going to operate so that we can successfully launch this project, right? So it takes a little bit of time, but you got to start by setting the precedent that successful projects like ours are going to be built on transparency and tough conversations. So how do you do that? Start by inviting them to gently open up about their biggest collaboration challenges, right? Like, what have been some of the problems that have existed between these departments? Just like tease it out. So sometimes somebody will say something in the middle of a team meeting where they'll say, well, you know, if IT ever got around to doing this, we would be, and then you seize those. So you could seize moments like that and jump in and be like, can we talk about that? Or you can say things like, hey, to make sure we do this project really well, while also making it as easy as possible in each of your departments, I just want to ask, what have been some of the difficulties you all have experienced in working together, right? So now you're explicitly inviting them in a gentle kind of way. You're just putting it out there and seeing what they say. And here's where preparation comes into play. If you've done your research ahead of time and you've talked to the departments and the members individually, you kind of already know what are some of their biggest complaints, right? You should see that curveball coming ahead of time. So in case they don't volunteer directly, just introduce it to yourself. You're like, and speaking to some of you before, I've heard that one of the biggest complaints has been that marketing doesn't stick to the scope requirements. Is that true? Does somebody want to talk about that? So again, you're gently opening it up. And usually when one of these band-aids come off, it starts. People then start talking about it. And it's not easy, but it's like in all these conversations, you're going to have to play the role of like an artful mediator. You're going to have to be like an emotionally intelligent ninja. Like it requires facilitation skills, right? And the key is past all the technical and bureaucratic jargon, especially if you're a consultant coming in, like try to get past all the long-winded conversations, try to identify the root cause of the problem. Like you'd be surprised, every time I do one of these conflict resolution workshops, I don't know too much about that industry, but I'm like, after all, they'll throw it, we were talking about acronyms, they'll throw all these acronyms and big terminology. And then they're like, so to be clear, you're saying that he didn't listen to you. And I'll be like, yes. Like, okay, good. Well, that's how simple human emotions are. It's in the sense that like, you can kind of get what they're trying to articulate. And once people agree on what the root problem is, ask them for the suggestions, like in the form of actions, behaviors, or best practices to follow to make sure it never happens again, right? So it's like, this could be things about like how timely information should be shared, what kind of standards we should maintain for equality, how far in advance notifications need to be given to each department, or how day-to-day work should be done. So it's going to be based around saying what you want to come up with is try to identify, I like to say 5 top behaviors or values the team can implement to solve their biggest problems, right? And again, what you want to do is come up with things that people really feel like, if we do these actions or these values, people are going to feel more like, oh, the other team or the other department is listening. They're actually trying to make it better between us, right? And so what I do is I call it a culture covenant, which is why I have the picture of a covenant here, is that write down basically 5 action items in terms of to-dos or values and behaviors that everyone must practice to maintain a culture of trust and accountability between the departments. Because once the team comes up with this together and they have written it down, again, they've bought into it, not only publicly, but emotionally as well. And so you're asking them to abide by it and maintain it, and even kind of extend it to the larger departments. So if they see people acting in a not a good way, they can be like, hey, no, actually, I think we need to send them the updates in 48 hours. Like, that's how we agreed on. I think it's just be better, right? So this team becomes that glue to make sure people are practicing and maintaining behavior. So the last step I would say is that when you talk about your top 5 values and best practices to follow as a team, try to give them situations ahead of time so they know how to respond to it. So try to get them to role play, right? So most often that's the problem. They'll say, okay, yeah, we should do more timely communication. Okay, great. What does that look like? What if let's say a customer requirement comes up, instead of just quickly forwarding an email to IT, what do you think we should do? So then someone will say, oh, well, I think we should ask for full scope requirements and look for existing technical redundancies in the first 48 hours. Perfect. Great. Now you've got them to walk through the process and get them to say, okay, this is how we're going to start changing behavior and acting on it in these kind of situations. So in summary, when you give them a challenge, define what success looks like by giving them a common success benchmark, create a performance challenge around that benchmark, and then make sure you have a culture covenant, which is just basically top 5 behaviors and values you want to do and practice around that. So that's the second part.
I love it. Question to you. How often do you do these things? So I'm assuming these like conflicts, do you do it a week into it? Do you do it on a monthly basis? How often do these people need to come together to discuss this? Because part of the challenge is getting people together is a challenge. Meetings, everyone is overloaded with meetings. So how often do you think this is like on a monthly basis, or is it in the beginning maybe more and then later on less frequent?
Yeah, I mean, the science of this is that it has to be frequent in the beginning, because these people are just getting to know each other, especially like somebody from marketing and IT, and now they have to figure out how to work together, and you got to do it right from the beginning. So in the beginning, you got to say, hey, how should we best work together, and what do we define success like? And so that requires a good couple of meetings, because it won't happen the first time. It'll take a good couple of weeks to make sure that they are on the same page. As the project has got stability and they're used to working with each other and they respect and trust the way they work with each other, then you can put a little bit more time in it. But again, if you're implementing a change or a new product, there's a sense of urgency to it. So that urgency of that implementation, the change you're implementing, will kind of drive the meetings. They'll be like, hey, we need to get this done because IT is waiting or whatever. So it could, in its own way, lead to like a recurring cycle, and how often the teams meet. But yeah, definitely more in the beginning.
Yeah, I feel like there should be different types of meetings with different frequency happening. So you have the folks who are, well, what I would refer to in when I present work like that are the working bees. These are people on the ground doing the work. Those might have to do a daily or every other day stand up just to make sure they're aligned. But then you need to have almost like a weekly statuses of like, how are we doing on this KPI? What are we blocked in general? How this is going? And this is where, whether they're doing a sprint process or, I'm not going to go into agile and waterfall. I have my own theory about this stuff. I'll leave that for another day. But whatever frequency that's happening, I think there needs to be like a weekly pulse. But then maybe on a monthly cadence, there needs to be this like review. Like, okay, guys, we've been doing this for a month. Now let's just see how this is going. And maybe that's the right time to ask these questions of like, hey, John from IT, these things, we've been seeing that things are moving a little bit faster. That's great. Is there any opportunity for us to assist in expediting that? Or is there any other things that the marketing team can do to be more supportive? So I think a monthly review for that with the larger team And it doesn't have to be a crazy, long meeting, but it's just like getting a larger, like business review of like, is this going good, or do we need to? So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great idea, because I think only you can speak to the cadence you need for the projects you're seeing, because the thing is, as long as everyone agrees to it and they expect it, right? So it's like, hey, we're going to meet every month and we're going to give you an update. So now you've made a commitment and you're honoring that commitment. So when you honor commitments over and over again, you're being consistent. And when you're consistent, then people start trusting you. So whatever you guys decide on, everyone should decide on that together and be like, yeah, the IT department's like, yeah, that'd be great. If you can just clue us in every month, give us updates, that would make us feel like we're part of the process. So yeah, exactly. That's what I call part of behaviors and practices the team adopts as like, this is how we're going to work together. Yeah, that's a good one.
Great.
All
Love
right.
it.
So last point. So once you've gotten them to, you've got the departments to meet and break bread together, and you've got them to build a plan and come to an agreement how they should work together, we're kind of done, right? I would say no. You got to protect your initiative. I think this is where a lot of consultants sometimes drop the ball, or just leaders in general, they drop the ball, because the truth is transformations don't happen in a vacuum, right? If you really want to effectuate meaningful change for these departments, you got to understand that they're, again, like I said before, there's systemic and cultural forces at play that have been there long before you came and will be there long after you're gone. And so if you don't understand some of the constraints, the hierarchies, the incentives these people are working within, you're basically dooming your project to be ineffectual, or at worst, it's going to fail, right? So how do you make sure all your hard work isn't undone? The answer is simple. It lies in relationships. I like this quote from famed sociologist and author Alan G. Johnson, which says, systems don't change unless relationships change. And that's at the core of my next step. Like, you protect your initiative, you got to really build a strategy to reach out and seal the relationships for this change all over the company. And that's a three-prong approach. So let me show you. First, you got to get top-down buy-in. So what I mean by that is you need the blessings of the gods, right? And we talked a little bit about this, and for each project, it might be a bit different, right? The person who brings you in might be the CEO, or the person who brings you in might not have that much power, so to speak. But as soon as you have a strategy in place, try to call for an all stakeholder meeting immediately, and try to get the rest of the leadership circle to hear about what you all agreed to. Get them to sign off on it, and even if possible, pledge to like supporting this project, right? You want people to, again, publicly commit to saying like, this project is important for us, especially if it's leadership, and getting them to emotionally buy into it is a huge, huge step. Because once you get them to showcase their commitment and have them signal it to the rest of the company. And again, this is a little bit of a big ask. So in an ideal environment, what you would get is some sort of announcement that the leadership team makes. The best case scenario, the CEO himself saying this project is very important to us, or just get the department heads to issue a joint statement together. And what it's showing is that, hey, we're unified, this is a priority, this is what we're planning on doing, everything is clear. And the most important part about this is that employees are looking. They're taking cues from their leaders. So if they see that their leaders are saying this, they're like, okay, that's interesting. You guys are actually saying this is a big priority, but then what are you actually doing about it? So the other part to this is that the same cadence you're talking about, Jerry, with like keeping IT in the loop, you want to keep leadership in the loop. Keep them in the loop. You want to keep giving them updates and make that as part of the expectation of how this project works. Because the more they get updates, the more they're going to feel like, oh yeah, this is good. We're making progress on this. Or let me help move some roadblocks out of your way. As much as possible, have the leaders all in the same room and they're getting these updates, and ask them to then communicate these updates, if possible, to the rest of the organization. So you're creating this cycle where it's like, this team feels like, oh yeah, the work we're doing is actually important, and the departments are seeing that as well, and the leaders kind of just scaling that message to the rest of the company. So that's super important, okay? So that's the first step to protecting your initiative. Get leaders to buy into it and announce it and proclaim it. The second step is a bottoms-up approach, because at the end of the day, it's like Jerry, you were saying, the people at the bottom who have to work together. Like, they're the ones who have to work across the aisle and work together. And they might not necessarily be in on the leadership or the strategy meetings, but they still have to work together, and they're working within that culture. So you need to create a culture of meaningful attachment and psychological safety, which basically is a fancy word for saying trust. You need to create trust between these two departments on the ground level. And to help build that culture of trust and respect between the departments, it's very simple. Just get them to keep interacting. Like the science of organizational psychology couldn't be any clearer about this. People have, like, in their own ideas, like we have stereotypes and versions of what we think the other department's like. They break the moment you humanize the other person. So as much as possible, try to get people from both the camps together in like a fun or an educational networking setting, right? The focus, whether it's a luncheon or a training seminar or a retreat, should be on getting these people to interact. It should be very intentional, because the more you can get different department employees to work together and meet each other and just understand and talking, the more you can get them to build relationships, right? That you can tap into when you need things done. You're like, oh, I need to get this commit out of here. Who do I talk to? Oh, I know Jerry from IT. I should just talk to him myself. I don't need to go through this whole process around it. So use these events as a very important way to get people to connect, but also use these events where you're bringing IT and marketing people together as a way to ask for their feedback. Ask for them to give their suggestions, or see if anyone's interested in volunteering to help lead parts of the project with it as well, right? So the more you make it as a community public place for people to share their feedback or give their ideas or collaborate, the more you're, again, emotionally committing to this project and what they're doing, and the teams are getting, and the departments are getting closer. So that's the second one. The third one, this is the last oversight I think a lot of leaders or consultants make when implementing changes. They don't reach out to cross-functional teams and partners. As much as this is primarily between IT and marketing, the truth is they have other external stakeholders that they have to answer to as well. And if these other departments or teams or leaders, whether they're external or internal, see that you're giving a lot of love to just IT and marketing, they're going to feel left out, right? So you don't want to create any sort of problems with those people. So when it comes to stakeholders outside, get them in from the beginning as well. So figure out who are some of the most important people you need to keep in touch with for this project to see itself through, and try to invite them maybe in the launch meeting, right? The first strategy or the launch meeting you're having with the leaders. Try to bring them in so they feel important, and make sure they have a voice at the table so they say some of their comments. But again, try to get them to commit publicly. Yeah, no, this is a good project. We also will help out as much as possible. So do let us know. And the last thing I'll say about cross-functional stakeholders is that most often they're the ones who are left out of the room, and getting their help when you need it, even if it's small times, is crucial, because it could be a huge roadblock and you end up wasting a couple of weeks on that. So make sure to always reach out, especially if you're the coordinator of the project, always touch base with them and advocate for them, right? So just say, hey, I know from people in purchasing, we have to do it this way, otherwise they're not going to be happy. I just want to put it out there that this is what I'm thinking about. So advocating for cross-functional stakeholders, because they're lower on the totem pole of like priority, is a good way to make sure their voice is still heard within the room. So like I said, the last part for protecting your initiative is make sure you have top-down buy-in, get leadership to back your project immediately and publicly, build strong interdepartmental bonds and buy-ins through frequent networking interactions, and finally include and advocate for cross-functional stakeholders from the get-go as well. So though in this way, you're helping protect your change initiative as much as possible within the company.
This is really powerful, because I would say firsthand, the most success I've seen with initiatives was folks who invested in that second point, the strong I cannot say that word.
Yeah, interdepartmental. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because it becomes like, you know, it's almost like when you are moving to a neighborhood and you're in your house, everyone's cool in your house, your neighbors, they're cool. And then all of a sudden your son plays with the daughter from the next door. All of a sudden you guys are doing barbecues together. Like that interdepartmental, or like things that are not directly, not meant or built to be working together. That initial relationship actually opens up a lot of opportunities where, instead of someone, oh, I have a problem with IT, well, I know the people at IT. They're not doing this on purpose to just like screw us over. They're just probably busy, or they didn't understand how important this was for us. So it really softens the the way these two departments can work together.
Mm-hmm.
The third point you mentioned, this is new to me, but I really see it because in a way, in many cases, you start initiatives like this, 1-2 departments, but then you really want it across the entire company. And although you want to share with them the success, but it's also good for them to see how things start, because they should see how it was in the beginning. It could be dysfunctional, siloed. There's beef between people, and then at a certain point, they're like, "Look how much we accomplished." So these departments now say, I really like this. I'm very happy with the work you guys done. Can we adapt some of that and for us to do something similar?
Yeah.
So that idea of protecting the initiative is very, very true. I think the problem that I feel that could be companies can run into is that this needs dedication. This needs this is someone to do this on their own job, on top of their existing
right.
It's a lot, right? So the way I would recommend is maybe this is not only a one-person job, and also this is where the idea of a program owner, like someone who is managing the program, because I look at this as a program. It's not only a project manager. You're not managing day-to-day activities. You're really managing the whole initiative. I feel like there needs to be, maybe not fully dedicated, but someone with bandwidth that can really see it from beginning to end. I've seen this happen with many of my projects where that person, although they don't know exactly what I do, they don't know exactly what this KPI means, but they understand that there is these 3 steps that you mentioned, that these need to come and work together so that there is value driven out of this.
That's right.
So definitely as a program owner in that capacity can help in taking this from beginning till the end. Because one of my concerns is like when things might fall off after a while, or someone who is the main owner gets another project or goes on maternity or paternity leave and leave it to someone else who is new to this. You need someone to sponsor. You need someone to be fully immersed into this, and this is going to be their bread and butter for the next few months or so. And I think that's all of these add to making these 3 steps come to reality.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think relationships are like muscles, right? Because if you, like in the beginning, come with all this gusto and you're like, I'm going to bring this change, and you see this all the time with CEOs and new leaders and people who come in, is that they say, oh, we're going to do this, and then it doesn't. It kind of falls off because the work of actually doing the change is so much, you forget the relationships, which is equally important, because those are the people who are going to, okay, yeah, I'll take that extra nudge for you. I'll go the extra mile for you. That's so important. So yeah, I completely agree. Like somebody needs to be dedicated towards maintaining the relationships within an organization that are critical for your project to move forward. I 100% agree. Yeah.
Amazing. Anything else you want to add? Any outside of these 3 steps?
No, I think for me, again, none of this is easy. I'm giving broad principles, broad outlines. It differs for each project. But I just say, like, to your point, Jerry, like this stuff takes time, because most often you're coming into a company that's, the employees have been burnt a little bit, right? Like there've been previous initiatives that have been there and they're just like, they're rolling their eyes when you come in. So you got to be
it all the time. They're
exactly.
Like, here we go again.
Here we go again. Another new initiative, so be mindful of that, but don't take it personally. Like if you stick to some of these principles and integrate it in your own way, just be patient, focused, and consistent. I'm telling you, give it a couple of months, like just keep doing it in a disciplined manner, and results will come out. Like it will actually show itself. So yeah, stick with it.
No, I agree. I'm very happy that you have thought through and laid it out in a way that actually it's very doable to implement. It's not rocket science. It's building culture and relationship and really working together towards one thing. This is great, Nahil. I'm very happy we did this. We recorded this, of course. Yes. So Nahil, please tell people where they can reach you and what kind of work you can do with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, I work with companies and teams all the time. So whether they're looking to make big changes or work on their own conflicts or just kind of energize the team or the company. So you can find me at wearehuman.co, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Nikhil Paul. Yeah, send me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always talking about things like this. Jerry and I are always trading ideas on LinkedIn and stuff like that. So yeah, I would love to help, just even be part of the conversation. And yeah, please keep in touch.
Absolutely. And we're going to have this recording on our YouTube channel. We're going to have a blog post with like quick summary of all this on our website, with also contact information for Nikhil. One thing too is like two things that he didn't talk about today. One is that he has an excellent newsletter that he sends every week with amazing content, very digestible and very like entertaining. And two, he has some videos showing his energy and his dance moves. He's dance moves that I would definitely recommend people to check out. But man, very happy that we did this, and really thank you. I know we spent a lot of time preparing. I think I've been getting some people message me saying that this has been great. So we should do this again. Maybe we'll bring this into reality with one of our clients, and then come back and just have the client come and tell the story of how.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I would love to. Thank you again. Seriously, I appreciate Jerry, Sammy, all of you for having me. And yeah, I'd love to keep the conversation going. So,
absolutely. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
All right.